So we see in the beginning of Derech Hashem, which is a book written by the Ramchal, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto. And this is one of the few books that present Judaism systematically. Says the Ramchal that every person, every Jewish person, tzarich she'yamin ve'yeda, he needs to believe and to know that there is an eternal existent, first existent, that is the creator and sustainer of everything that exists in the universe. Everything that exists in the universe requires something to sustain it. He doesn't provide at this stage of the book any explanation. He says this is the basic premise, beginning in Judaism. Okay? So according to this, can we have a Jewish atheist? Because we start off with a position that a person needs to believe and to know. We spoke a little bit about the difference between belief and knowledge, and that they are different, and I think everybody understands that those two terms refer to different types of intellectual processes. And really the focus for the Ramchal is on the section that deals with knowledge. And he says that a person should also know that this being, his essence, or his existence, his true existence, is something that cannot be understood by anybody. So that when we try to understand God's true essence, it is something that we won't be able to understand. And it's a very, very important concept, in not only in Judaism, but it's just a general concept of being a human being and recognizing the limitations of our mind. There are some things that we're not going to be able to know, period. There are some things that are beyond human capability of understanding. For example, your wife's mind, you're not going to be able to understand. She's going to say certain things you think you're going to understand, and then you know. I'll give you an example. Well, my wife said, go to the market and buy bread, milk, and butter. Okay? So I went to the market and I saw bread, milk, and butter. So what do you think I did? I bought milk, bread, and butter. But they had a sale on flowers, so I bought like 2 roses. And I brought it to her. And what do you think happened? She was so happy, like, oh wow, that's beautiful. Oh. So I did the next logical step. Next time she sent me to the market to buy bread, butter, and milk, I bought her a bouquet of flowers. And I brought to her. And she said, where's the bread, milk, and butter? I said, look, last time I went and I brought the bread, the milk, and butter, I brought you 2 flowers. The 2 flowers made you so happy, so I just brought you lots of flowers. And she was mad at me. Where did I go wrong? You didn't get it.
Well, you didn't buy the sufficient.
I gauged...
Of your trip to the store.
You what?
You didn't fulfill the reason why I went to the store.
The reason I went to the store is to make her happy. Right?
Not to her.
See, that's the difference. See, you understand it better than I do. To me, I thought, the flowers made her really happy, so I'll bring her even more. But apparently not. It's flowers with bread, milk, and butter. Bread, milk, and butter. Bread, milk, and butter. I would have thunk it. All right. There are some things we're not going to be able to understand. So how do we know this? How do we know? Because he says you have to know that God's essence or his existence is something that we can't fathom. How do we know this? How can we know that God exists? You heard Rabbi Tat speaking at noon, and he said, you can't prove the existence of God. You can make arguments. I was very happy to hear that he shares, what I spoke to you about last time. So that you see, I'm not as crazy as you think I am. But the question is, so then, okay, if that's the case, how can I know? Because believing is you could believe things that are false. Right? You need evidence. What evidence can you have of that which you can't understand?
From what you can understand.
So he says, Ramchal says something else. He says that the reason we can know this is because of our tradition. There are things in our tradition that are passed down from generation to generation, from our forefathers to the prophets, which is what? The divine experience on Har Sinai. The reason that we know that God exists is because our ancestors experienced God and they passed on their experience to their children and their children to their children.
And that was done in a very public event.
Correct.
That sounded like he said, she said.
Correct.
Nobody had a dream and woke up and said, I talked to
Correct.
God.
Exactly. Not only that, you see, if let's say you have 20 guys. How many guys are in the Jaili Connect? 10? All right, let's take 10. Fine, great number. Let's say 5 guys wake up in the morning and they say, at breakfast, we saw God. What will the other 5 say?
Yeah, okay.
And like, no, really? Okay, fine, separate them, put them in different rooms, right? So each of the 5 that saw God are in separate rooms, and then the other 5 interrogate each one. And what would happen? Why would they be different? No, let's say it really happened.
It could be the same.
It's perception.
No, they all say he came and he spoke. He said the same thing. What did he wear? He doesn't wear anything. What did he look like? It's this energy, whatever. They all have the same report. Would the other 5 believe him? The person who didn't have the experience is going to have a very, very hard time believing somebody who does. The reason that Mount Sinai experience worked is because everybody had the same experience.
Right. I mean,
They asked each other, like, did you see that? Yeah, dude, did you see? Did you? Yeah. Everybody, really? Nobody's like, what? I didn't see anything. What are you talking about? There's nothing here. See, there's nothing. No, every single person said, we saw the exact same thing. Because Moshe Rabbeinu says, your eyes saw it. If they didn't see it, why would they accept the book from Moses? That the book says, you saw everything. They would have said, sorry, listen, this book says that I saw these. I didn't. I'm sorry. I can't accept this. Because I'm a man of truth. And we don't have any record of anybody opting out. None. And in every religion, you have a record of people opting out. Saying, no, didn't happen. We have it in Christianity, you have it in Islam, you have it in Hinduism and certain things. You have it in Buddhism. Trying to think of others. The ones that are they have revelatory traditions are the ones that are going to have these issues. So he says the reason that we know about the existence of God is because our ancestors experienced it. And the Moshe Rabbeinu commanded them, based on the command of Hashem, that you shall not forget the things that your eyes have seen, and you shall tell them to your sons and your sons' children, and so on and so forth. So he says, we don't know about the existence of God because we studied science. That's not how we connect to God. We connect to God from our tradition. It doesn't mean that what science is going to provide us is going to contradict what the Torah tells us. No, not necessarily. The question is what happens when the two seem to contradict. What do we do? That's a separate discussion that we can have another day. So he says that once, the Ramchal is saying, once we know that we have a valid tradition that goes back to Har Sinai, there is no break in our tradition, then we see that there's nothing that reason or the rational faculty is going to deny. Because everything seems to fit. And he says, now, the other thing that we need to know about God is that God's existence is necessary. Our existence is not necessary. Why? Because our existence was caused, right? As Rabbi Tatz talked about, billions of sperms, right? There was just one sperm and one egg. It could have been another sperm, which means it wouldn't be you, right? There were other possibilities. So that you are not the cause of your own existence, and that the causes that led you to your existence is the reason that you're here. There isn't anything in you that caused yourself. Does that make sense? God's essence is that He exists. That's what it means. God exists. God's essence is existence, and His everything that exists because He exists. If nothing existed, God would still exist. But if God didn't exist, nothing would exist. I'll follow that. We should know then that God's existence is independent of anything in the universe. It's not dependent on anything. Our existence is dependent on lots of things. For example, give me an example that your existence is dependent. What?
Dependent on
Water, good.
Air.
Food. Your parents, right? They created you. That is, if they decided not that night not to get together, you wouldn't exist. That's it. So our existence is very dependent on all sorts of things. And there is an idea that matter by nature decomposes. Matter by nature degenerates. And you need some source, some force to maintain the existence of matter. So this idea of matter as something that requires sustenance is a very, very important principle, because really God sustains all creation. Everything that is created, God sustains. God keeps everything going. If He didn't, if He withdrew His sustenance for 1 second, then nothing would exist. Nothing would exist. Not to a point where your corpse would exist, but nothing. The basic molecules that make up everything would just vanish. Nothing. Do you understand this idea? It's a very, very powerful idea. Right? So in order for something to exist, you need certain things. You need to have space. Right? All material entities require space because they take up space. Whether it's a photon of light, or a molecule, or a neutron, or a proton, they take a certain amount of space. If space was removed, what would happen to those entities?
cease to exist.
They would gone. And God is referred to as He who provides space to everything in the universe. Right? When we learned about that last time with Nefesh HaChaim. We continue, and he says that you have to understand that God's existence is simple. That there is no multiplicity in God. He is ultimate perfection and is simple. That is, He is completely one. You can't talk about God's love as separate from God's memory, from God's... For us, we have all these different faculties. We have imagination, we have a memory, we have rationality. We might probably, we might have two types of memories. Memories for imaginative faculty, and then a memory for the rational faculty. It depends on what model we use. But from God's perspective, He has no independent or separate powers. He is just God, just one entity. And I'm moving ahead for the part that I really want to talk about. That there is only one God. There cannot be more than one God. That's the things that we have to know about God. So we need to know 6 things. 1, that God exists, that God is all perfect, that he's a necessary existent, that his existence isn't dependent on anything, that he is simply one, and he is utterly unique. There's nothing like him at all. Those are the 6 things that we have to know about the nature of God in Judaism. Questions? Any of this is new that you've never heard before? Yes? Oh, good. Yishai.
There's nothing like him. What does it mean that we're made in his image?
That's a very good question. I will give you 2 interpretations. There are 2 ways to understand what does it mean. It certainly doesn't mean that God has a physical image. Because if you say that God has a physical image, is God male or female? See, so if we understand the term image in a physical term, then we get into this problem of God having a physical manifestation. He has a body. But we see that a body is not unique. And a body is something that is made up of 2 aspects, matter and form. And anything that is made up of 2 things is dependent on something else to bring those 2 things together. We just said that God is not dependent on anything, so therefore God cannot be a body. So however we understand the term image, it cannot mean that we're talking about a body. So the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim explains that really in the image of God is that we have an ability that God has. That is the similarity. And what's the ability? That we have an ability to transcend physicality by abstract thought. Okay?
Wait, so our being like him is that we have the ability to transcend the physical, or the ability
Correct.
to abstract thought?
But that's what it means to transcend the physical. Is the ability that you have to think abstract thoughts. To take something that is physical, like dogs, right? And abstract the concept of a dog from all the dogs that you've ever seen. Or you are able to contemplate the concept of happiness or good. Right? Those things are abstract thoughts.
And by using that tool of abstract,
So that, and God is the ultimate incorporeal entity, non-physical entity. God is a mind thinking a thought. That's how the Rambam and others talk about it. That really, if you want to understand God, it's kind of like a mind. A mind thinking itself. Now today it's very hard for us to contemplate non-physical examples. So for us, it's like just thinking of a supercomputer that's running certain algorithms all the time. Right? Because we think in that way. But just think, then strip the computer away and create an algorithm that's absolute infinite. And maybe that can help you understand it. Maybe. That's one. Nefesh HaChaim says, which I don't know if we looked at, Nefesh HaChaim says that in the same way that God has the ability to create, we have the ability to create and destroy. That's the similarity that we have with Hashem.
first opinion was
Rambam, with a mem in the end. Or as one of my students in Nebraska said, Rambam. So the Rambam said, yeah, the Rambam sure said it.
It's interesting, the idea of transcending physicality.
Yes.
That is I would say the abstract thought allows us to transcend physicality.
Absolutely.
Which is why, I don't know, maybe this is me being like semantically, whatever, the abstract thought comes first. And then like in anthropology, there's this idea of like proximity in time and space.
Right.
An abstract thought, the sheer like fact that you were reading off of that, reading Hebrew,
Yeah.
means that was not written yesterday, and it was not written, so it's been around. It has existed, and it's not necessarily at the same time that you have existed.
Right.
So that's just like the transcendence.
Transcendence. The idea of abstract thought is really in the process of epistemology. And epistemology is the study of how do we know what we know. And really the process starts with the data that we collect through our senses. Right? So we look at the world, we hear the world, we smell, we touch. Right? So our senses accumulate enormous amount of data all the time. And the data is sent into our mind, into this faculty that is called the common sense. It's just a storage of all the information. The imagination then takes that information and produces an image in your mind. So if I tell you as an exercise to close your eyes, you can close your eyes. And if I tell you imagine a pink giraffe, you could. And if I could tell you a pink giraffe playing a viola while dancing to Van Halen, you could also see it. Why? Because you know what a viola is. Let's assume you know what a viola is. Just a little bigger of a violin, right? And you know what a giraffe is, and you know what pink is, and you know what Van Halen is. And you could put all of them together. And the imagination takes all the data, all the things that I just mentioned, and you can put it in an image. But abstraction is to look at the image and try to figure out what is universal about whatever we're talking about. So, for example, you could look at hundreds and hundreds of triangles, of right triangles, and I'd say, now think of an abstract concept of triangles. What is a triangle? So you would say it is an object whose interior angles are equal to the sum of 180 degrees. That is the definition of a triangle, right? Because you could take from all the different shapes, as long as it's this type of triangle, the sum of interior angles is going to be 180. That's what it means. So you've abstracted. So the process of abstraction comes from, you're going from sort of the grassroots up, and you're transcending higher levels and higher levels, that automatically you're trying to look at how does this particular entity represent an abstract universal truth. Right? In a sense, this is very Platonic, because Plato says knowing things that constantly change is not really knowledge. Knowledge is about knowing things that are universally true all the time, right? Universally means all the time, everywhere in the universe. That is what we should strive for in terms of knowledge. To know that, this person got up and went, and who cares? It's not Jeopardy. Jeopardy is not knowledge for Plato, from a philosophical perspective. So the abstraction is taking all the tons of data from the physical world and abstracting universal truth from all this information and transcending the specific to the general, to the universal. That's the idea. And by doing that, you have a better understanding of the principles that guide the universe.
Induction or deduction?
Yeah, induction and deduction are depending on what steps you're doing within logic.
Right.
It's not. This is a little different. Abstraction is a little different. You're trying to see from this case, how does is this principle true? And a lot of times you have a principle and you're trying to test it based on this triangle to this triangle or this dog and that dog, and does it work? No, it doesn't work. So my principle has to be
Hypothetico-deductivism.
Yeah,
Is the
right.
phrase. Sure.
Now, so why did God create this whole thing that we call reality? What does he need the headache for? Right? What does he need it for? So he says, the ultimate purpose of creation is for God to bestow his goodness to his creatures. What was the purpose of creation? What?
Did you just say it?
I just said it. I just want to see if anybody got it. Guy, did you hear it? The ultimate purpose of creation is for God to give his goodness to others. So why did God create the world? To bestow his goodness to others. To others.
Doesn't answer the reason.
So why does he do that?
Right. I I mean, it answers the purpose, like, but why?
Teach us that we should do it.
No, that's the sort of, so what do we learn from it? He's asking a question going even further. You're going forward, he's going
He's
backwards.
saying, why would Hashem do that?
Yeah, why would Hashem do that? Yeah. Why create you in the first
Well, it's
place?
not just saying that, like, what I said is not necessarily just going forward and saying that's what we can learn from it, but maybe that's also why he did it, so that that's what we would learn from it.
But why did he create you in the first place?
I mean, if you didn't exist, you wouldn't learn.
So that we would learn,
Mm.
like,
But we.
But why? No, but why would he need, why have you learn anything?
That's
Why have you exist? Did he need you to
no,
exist?
of course, he didn't need to, because
Okay,
he's dependent on it.
good. So then why did he create this everything? Why did he create this? So you're asking a very good question. What? Yeah. His nature is to give. That's his nature. That's his essence. To give.
I thought we can't say anything about his essence.
What? But we see the effects of his essence. From that we see.
So we've deduced that his nature is to give.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the only logical reason.
Right. Because he says, we see that God is the ultimate perfection, that is without any lacking, and no one has any, he says, and nothing is perfect like him at all. And he says that God's, this is very interesting. He says, Alken, beyot chefzo, like God's will is to bestow his goodness on others, and he doesn't want to give his goodness partially, because that would be imperfect. Whatever God does, he does it most perfectly because he is perfect. And so he wants to give in the best way that he could. So he says that he gives to his creatures the best that his creatures could receive.
Doesn't that inherently imply a limitation on God's part?
It implies a limitation on our part, not
We
his
are
part.
creations of God.
Correct.
Then why is he creating a limitation on our part?
Well, because the question is this. In order to bestow goodness on you, you have to be a receptacle. Correct?
Right.
So a receptacle by nature is going to be able to receive, and it can't receive infinitely.
Well, who says?
Because if you think about it, if you're going to have if you have infinite amount of individuals receiving infinitely, what is the differentiating principle between them? You have to have a differentiating principle, otherwise they merge into one. In a genus, if you have a group of individuals that are all the same, what differentiates one in the genus than from another? You have what is called a special difference in a species, right? There's something, so what differentiates me from you?
A lot of things.
Like what?
Morphological, what do you look?
Body, the physical, right? Because in a sense, that is what differentiates. But if you're dealing with receptacles and you're not dealing with bodies yet on that level, then what differentiates one receptacle from another? Its ability to receive.
Sure.
If the ability to receive is identical, then they would all merge into one.
Why? I mean, you can't differentiate amongst them, but they're all the same. But like, why is that one?
No, but because then in a genus of, how would you tell one receptacle from another?
Do you need to?
What?
Do you need to?
Yes.
Why?
Because you can't, it's a very good question. If you have a set, how can you tell, if you have a set of entities, how can you differentiate between one entity to another? How do you know that you have more than one?
You label it.
What?
You label it.
Yeah, there's difference, right? This one is A, this one's B, this
But
one's
that
C.
assumes the necessity to actually differentiate and like understand that there's. understand? And I guess the reason I'm asking these questions is because
Good. No, I appreciate you asking.
when you say we are limited as receptacles, whatever, I mean, as whatever phrase you want to use,
Yeah.
we are creations of God. And if we are limited and God can only give because of our limitation, then doesn't that imply that God's limited in what he can create? Do you understand?
There's a question on if God, let me ask you this. Can God learn something new?
I mean, if he's omniscient, no.
No. Is that a limitation?
I mean, he can't learn, yeah.
Wait. Is that a limitation?
It depends on how you define limitation.
Well, how do you define it?
I mean, I define things in terms of like what I strive to do. So I strive to learn, right?
Yeah.
And it is very much a like concept of our lives. If the purpose of our lives were to like lose knowledge, then not being able to learn would not be much of a limitation. I mean, like this is a semantics game, but like it's, you understand?
But semantics are very important
Oh, I
when you're
agree.
trying to understand the concept.
Right. I love semantics.
Good.
But I'm saying, if you assume that we are limited, which is like he could only give what we could only receive.
Right. No, I understand your question, but I'm pointing out to you that there are some things that we would say is a limit, but the limit is because of his perfection. God can't learn anything new, not because it's a limitation, because he's perfect. His perfection dictate that it would be a limitation on his perfection or a contradiction to his perfection if we say that God can't learn. However, there's another category of things that if I tell you, can God create a stone which he cannot lift?
I mean, that's inherently paradoxical.
No, it's nonsense.
Right.
It's not paradoxical, it's nonsensical. It's like saying can God create a round triangle? It doesn't mean anything. That is, I've put words together that have no logical meaning. So if you say, no, God can't do it, or God can't, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean that there's a limitation to create. Remember, what you're asking me is, why couldn't God create a creature that is infinite? By definition, a creature is finite.
Can you remind me why what was his limitation? What caused this, or what was the limitation caused by our like restriction?
So we didn't get into that yet, but we are going to get into it. I guess they're signaling me that we have to end, but let's talk about this on Sunday. So we'll talk about that because you will see that the reason that the bestowing, the goodness, is giving in a limited way is because it's an expression of God's perfection. But you need 3 more steps in order to see it. So be patient with me. All right. Have a good Shabbos. We'll see you on Sunday.